Sometimes you need a hired gun to bring in a known criminal. A hard-nosed fighter to drag a pirate out of his sheltered cove. A hunter of outlaws to bring justice to the Badlands. Throughout our history, many cultures have used such bounty hunters to enact the state's will without the state's badge. And they have provided some of the greatest stories and protagonists and antagonists in fantasy tales. From Boba Fett to Jon Snow to the Killjoy team, bounty hunters remain popular with readers and watchers of fantasy series. So today, let's talk about their historical precedent, their use in fantasy and science fiction, and how you can apply them to your world and your story. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. Today's video is sponsored by World Anvil, a set of world building tools to help you create and store your world. Today we're taking a look at bounty hunters, so I took a look at World Anvil's template dealing with organizations, one of the many article templates available to help you build your world. One of the questions from the template that I really liked was the motto question and the alternative names question, which helped me flesh out my few runners, which are bounty hunters in my world. If you want to use World Anvil, you can sign up for free using the link below, and if you're ready to go for a professional subscription, you can get 10% off on that link. And thank you very much for World Anvil for sponsoring my content. All right, let's crack on. So I'm going to discuss bounty hunters by types as I see them. The first type I'd like to discuss is the hired hand of the law. Now, this is the type of bounty hunter where there aren't enough lawmen to answer to the needs of the community. And so the law hires some additional people to do its job. This is a tradition that goes back all the way to Rome. So when Rome was expanding into the various Germanic territories, there did come a time when there was enormous lawlessness in those territories. Banditry was absolutely rife. And the commanders of the various legions did not have enough resources to be a civil police force as well as an expansionistic conquering army. But that didn't present them with that much of a problem. They turned to the locals and helped them in eradicating this bandit problem. The most famous of these Roman outlaw hunters was a dude called Charito, and he operated on the Rhine frontier. Basically, he hunted bandits using their own techniques against them. He would sneak up to bandit camps and chop their heads off without so much as a by your leave. He became an assistant to the Roman commander Julian, and Julian terrorized the bandit camps during the day, while Charito ensured that they couldn't sleep, and between the two of them, they brought those kinds of banditry to an end in the Germanic territories. You can see this kind of system evolving over the years as there are places that are fairly lawless. Now, a spin-off from it is the system that you can see with the thief takers in London, who I did speak about during my law enforcement video, and you can check out that in the information card. You can also see this kind of system with pirates and privateers, where the king of a country would give a ship captain a letter of marque that allowed them to hunt certain kinds of other ships and rewarded them for every ship that they thus capture. So they are not part of the country's navy, but they hunt under the auspices of the country as long as they hit the correct targets. If they hit targets not covered by their letter of marque, this is counted as a crime. And we see that as well as a common thread with bounty hunters. They are protected only so long as they stay within their mandate. But within their mandate, they have almost limitless powers. That kind of limitless power does, of course, lend itself quite hectically to corruption, and indeed the old thief-takers of London were incredibly corrupt because Jonathan Wild basically ran a thief guild while he was the thief-taker general of London. So you can definitely draw a corruption thread there if that's what you're looking for. But you can also see a more kind of classical implementation of the Roman bounty hunter, the dude who brings the law into the Badlands, in the Old West style of bounty hunter that is so beloved of the cowboy genre. This is the lone gunman who's hunting down the man that the government can't go after. A great example in fantasy is David Gemmell's John Chenau. In the John Chenau novels, we learn that he can be hired by a town to bring the law to their town, to wipe out bandits in the area, or maybe to free the town from a bandit stranglehold. Often, after he's cleaned up the situation that he was hired for, the town will ask him to move on because he lives a violent life, and they fear him for that. They fear him for the violence that he brings. John Chenau is a lone and lonely warrior who is trying to make the world a better place through his judicious application of violence. Now, I will say that despite the fact that I did really enjoy these books and they still rank among some of my favorite reads, it is a somewhat romantic view of that kind of lone gunfighter mentality. In both Rome's case and in the case of the United States, those kinds of bounty hunters were often also escaped slave hunters. And that brings us to the second type of bounty hunter, the long hand of the government. Here is a simple truth about any society that has slavery on an industrial level. Whether we're talking about the Romans or the United States cotton farms, the same applies in both cases. If you have that level of slavery, you will have bounty hunters who hunt escaped slaves. And they are probably going to be some of your least sympathetic characters. Essentially, they hunt people for the crime of wanting to live free. And of course, modern audiences are not going to like a person like that. You can put any spin on it that you like. It's not going to make for a happy place to tell modern audiences to have sympathy with a slave chaser. But it is interesting that these guys had broad mandates. American slave chasers could cross state lines into free states, into states where slavery was forbidden. Because remember, during this time period, America had this compromise between free states and slave-owning states, where only some states allowed slavery and the others did not. But if a slave escaped and crossed into a free state, that didn't mean they were free, because a slave chaser could still find them, and if he could prove that they were a slave, he could drag them back to the slave-owning state. The Roman slave chasers could draw on the local Roman garrisons for supplies and manpower and whatever else they needed in order to catch escaped slaves. So these kinds of bounty hunters have a lot of state resources behind them, but because they are not official agents of the state, they don't carry a badge, they can go places where the law can't. So an example of this is the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter books, the first few books before they become U.S. Marshals. So in these books, in the early books, the bounty hunters have a license. right? They have a monster bounty hunter license. And any monster that is covered by a warrant signed by a judge, they can hunt and apply literally any force to. And they are expected to execute that monster, not capture it, not drag it back, execute it, end it right there. So these guys don't carry a badge. They haven't been through specific training. They have been given a bounty hunter's license by the government, and they can cross state lines. They can probably even cross international boundaries, hunting their monster prey that they then bring back dead based on a warrant signed by a judge, not a trial basis. The state argues its case, the judge signs a warrant, and off the bounty hunter goes. Now, in the later books, they bring more control onto the bounty hunters by turning them into U.S. Marshals, grandfathering them into the U.S. Marshal Service, which is also an interesting take on it, since that does allow them to cross federal lines, but it does mean that they now have both more and less power than the old school bounty hunters. So if you like the discussion of the long hand of the law and the bounty hunter who goes where the law can't, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about the bounty hunter that hunts hidden organizations on behalf of the law. So this type of bounty hunter can't be openly associated with the state because they are hunting an organization that is the state's enemy. An example of this is the priest hunters of the 1700s. So Queen Anne in 1709 required all Catholic priests to swear the oath of abjuration, which recognized the Protestant Queen as the supreme head of the Church of England and Ireland. The Irish Catholic priests refused to swear this oath, and bounties were placed on their heads by the crown, with bigger bounties offered for archbishops and bishops. On a side note, when I was doing this research, it occurred to me that Catholics carry a lot of blame for the Inquisition and the Crusades and so on, and certainly they did do those things. But Protestants weren't blameless. They did their share of the killing in this whole religious dispute. Now, I'm not saying either side's innocent here. I'm a Finnish atheist. I have no dog in this fight. I'm just saying they both kind of killed each other a lot. Anyway, the most prolific of these priest hunters was a guy called John Maloney, whose surname is uncomfortably close to mine. I married an Irishman. And he was a horse thief in Castlebar, Ireland. Now, he got caught, and the state offered him a choice between the noose and becoming a priest hunter. He said no to the noose and yes to the priest hunter bit. His favorite trick in hunting priests was to fake a deathbed confession and then lure the priest to come and take his deathbed confession, draw a concealed weapon, and kill the priest. One of his targets wised up to this little game and actually stabbed him before he could stab said Catholic priest. And finally, old John came to a sticky end. Now, he was buried in unconsecrated grounds, and there is a persistent legend that says that there is a tree that grew over his grave, but it never blossoms. So that is a great little legend to include in, the history of such a man, like an evil dude who's died and been buried, and even the trees around him won't blossom. It's a great little detail. Anyway, so these types of bounty hunters kind of operate like spies behind enemy lines, and that is why they operate as bounty hunters. So if you enjoyed talking about bounty hunters who hunt hidden enemies, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about a futuristic and modern evolution, the bounty hunter as a job. So in our world, this role is fulfilled by people called bail's bondsmen. They chase down people who skip town on bail. This is shown in the TV series Once Upon a Time, where Emma, the main character's job, is that of jail bondsman. In fact, our introduction to Emma is her doing her job. So she is having dinner with a guy, and at first it just looks like a normal fancy dinner. And then she starts listing all of the things that he did, all of the crimes that he did, and how he skipped town on bail. And then she nabs him and chases him down and turns him in for the bounty on his bail. And I thought that that was a great introduction to Emma as a character in this kind of role. The thing about bail's bondsmen is that they can only take the specific job around that bail bond being available. And if they take it, they're the one who goes after that bond skipper and so on. You can see that this informed things like the Star Wars Bounty Hunters Guild. So in Star Wars, bounty hunters could be hired to capture or kill a designated target. Like, for example, Boba Fett was hired by the Hutts to capture Han Solo because Han Solo owed them money. Now, the Bounty Hunters Guild, also known as the Bondsman's Guild or simply the Bounty Guild, regulated bounty hunting throughout the Old Republic and the New, and the Empire. They worked alongside all galactic governments and they curate bounties for their members. So they make sure that the bounties offered are legit and will be paid when the requisite target is brought to the person in question. Now, these bounty hunters could cross galactic borders, so they'd go back to that going where the law can't, and also the kind of slave chasing model, chasing the target even though he's left your technical jurisdiction based on the bounty placed on his head. But it is not the state's agents who do that, because that would cause a war. Instead, it is the bounty hunter who does it on behalf of the government. You can see this model as well in the TV series Killjoys, which is a great TV series that I highly recommend. Now, it features 3 bounty hunters who work together as a team, Dutch, John, and Devin, and they work for RAC, Reclamation Apprehension Coalition, which is just a great name. They take on warrants to apprehend people or property for reward. And as part of being part of RAC, they have to swear to remain neutral in conflict and give no allegiance to any system or government. So again, you can see that working across state lines and going where the state cannot to find a bounty. And the role of the guild is again to curate the offers of bounty. So somebody would come to the guild and say, this is my offer, here is the money to prove I can pay for it, please make it available to your members. Now, in the case of killjoys, they actually rank the bounties. So only if you are of a high enough rank within the guild, so you have enough skill level and proven returns of bounties, are you allowed to take some of the higher level bounties. So they ensure satisfaction not just on behalf of the bounty hunters, but also on behalf of the clients. So if you enjoyed that exploration of kind of a more futuristic bounty hunter guild setup, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about implementing bounty hunters in your world. So I think that one of the key things that you need to think about is, how do people find out about bounties and how are they sure they'll get paid? Are there wanted posters? Is there a guild that curates bounty hunter requests? Is there an Craigslist where it's advertised on the internet? For bounty hunters to be able to do their job, they need to know that the bounty is available. What protection do bounty hunters have under the law? What are they allowed to do while they are within the limits of their agency? What resources can they draw on? And remember, there should always be a risk of losing their association with the government when they act outside the bounds of their agency. The line between criminal and bounty hunter should always be a thin one to create that tension, so that the bounty hunter, if they step outside the limits imposed by their warrant or the reward system or whatever agency governs them, if they step outside that, they should immediately turn into a criminal, and now they are subject to being hunted by their former colleagues. And those are my thoughts on bounty hunters in a fantasy world. If you like this video, maybe check out my video on political vigilantes and militants in a fantasy world. And if you want to connect around this or any other topic, remember that I do have a Discord server linked down below. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds.